All right. Hey, everybody. Connor Duncan here. Um, Young guy's been taking over this week, so I appreciate Brant and Noah have done theirs. I'm glad I've been able to ask to do it, and I'm excited to get into what we want to get into. We're picking up right at verse 9 in Joshua chapter 22, verse 9, right where Brant left off. And that says, "And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from the children of Israel out of Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go into the country of Gilead, to the land of their possession, whereof they were possessed, according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses." So this is basically just describing what tribes are going to be involved in this story, and it's again emphasizing that they own this land that they have. It says that they were possessed, and this is the land of their possessions. So verse 10 says that when they came into the borders of Jordan that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben and half the children of Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by Jordan, a great altar to see to. So we can see that these eastern tribes on the east side of Jordan, when they got into their land, one of the first things they did was actually build a large altar to the Lord. And they haven't told us yet why they built this altar. It just says that it was a large altar. We could really easily rip this out of context and be, when God does a victory, you need to make a reminder of that. And that's the whole message of this chapter. Great. Write that on your walls. Make one of these cheesy things behind me that my mom has. Just put that on your wall. But I think this is an example of, if you really dig into the context and put this in the context of the whole Bible and the whole counsel of Scripture, that's where you're really going to get the true meaning of that. So we'll go on to verse 11. And the children of Israel heard and say, "Behold, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh have built an altar over against the land of Canaan in the borders of Jordan at the passage of the children of Israel." So they can see this, the western tribes can see this from across Jordan. So that, again, emphasizes how big it is. And you're thinking, they would be happy with that, maybe, that they can see the altar. But verse 12 says, "And when the children of Israel heard it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered themselves together at Shiloh to go up to war against them." And so that's kind of puzzling when I first started getting into this. Why would they go to war against this monument? So we're going to have to go back pretty far. We're going to have to go back to Deuteronomy. Then we're going to have to go back to Genesis 12. And we're going to have to go back all the way to Genesis 3 to kind of outline the whole meaning of all this and what it means. And I just think it's so amazing how much the Old Testament connects together. And the reason for that is because it all circles around the promises made in Genesis 3 and the promise made in Genesis 12 and the covenant made in Deuteronomy. I have a second Bible open to Deuteronomy right now, and that's almost how you should read the Old Testament, because Deuteronomy is just that important. But first, we're going to go back to Genesis. And in Genesis, Adam and Eve fall in the garden and sin, and we're all familiar with that. And God curses the earth. But in Genesis 3:15, he promises that this war will happen of the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, but that the seed of the woman will crush Satan's head in the end. And up until Genesis 12, Genesis gives us an outline, basically, of stories of how you can see the woman's seed, you can see the serpent seed fighting with each other, but no matter what, God is preserving a faithful group, and that will be the seed that the Messiah will come through ultimately. So then we get up to Genesis 12, and that's where God makes his world-changing promise to Abraham. He tells Abraham that he will raise up a nation out of him, he will bring them into a land, and he will raise up a leader out of his seed. When you read that in context in Genesis, that is obviously the seed that is going to crush Satan's head. So this Genesis 12, the Abrahamic covenant, is just foundational to the Old Testament. You have to keep that in mind constantly when you're reading. So then we move through the Old Testament still. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's when we see God makes Israel a nation. He brings them out of Egypt, and he essentially marries them. He gives Moses the law, and he tells the people, would you like to come under this law and be my people? Moses sprinkles the blood, and the people accept. So God gives them the law and tells them if they will do these things, he will bless them, and it will end in a beautifully sustained relationship. But if they rebel, he will progressively curse them and wake them up. If they refused, they will be exiled, and he will take away the land that was promised to them. That's all Deuteronomy 28. To the Israelites, this law was commanded to be viewed as their lifeblood. They were to memorize it. They were to bind it to their foreheads. Like, you put your hand right here, it's You can always see that in your view, and that's basically why God told them to bind that to their forehead. So the law would always be in their view, and so that's applicable to us. Not that we need to put things on our forehead because we're not Israel. That's not our law. That's their law. But it is a principle that we need to keep God's law always in our minds, always being reminded of it. And then all throughout the Old Testament, when the Israelites are obeying Deuteronomy, I mean, this is even way later, they're doing great. They're in good shape. But more often than not, the curses are coming upon them. There's famine. They're being exiled. They get worse and worse. When you look at the minor and major prophets, they're normally just preaching directly out of Deuteronomy. So what does all this mean for this story? So all these other guys have gone through these past chapters of Joshua where God divides the land. And I believe that those verses are God's effort to show us the receipts, basically, is the right term, that Israel, through their ups and downs, after their wandering in the wilderness, ultimately they were faithful in their conquest of the land. They obey his commandments, and God fulfills his end of the bargain and gives them land. So that's something we can know about God, is that he's got the receipts, and he will mark down that he will keep his promises. And they will be being fulfilled day by day for them. Let's see where I'm at here. So a studied Israelite, an obedient Israelite, who is enjoying these blessings would know that if they're going to keep these things, they have to keep following the commandments in Deuteronomy. They're doing it beat for beat right now. So we'll see Deuteronomy verse 12:10. This is where we start to get back relating to that story. It says, "But when you cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit," that's exactly where we're at, "and he gives you rest from all your enemies round about, so that you dwell in safety, then there will be a place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. There you shall bring all that I command you, burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes." Talks about all the different things they need to do in the temple. "And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, and make your sons and daughters, male and female servants, and the Levite who is you within the gates, since he has no portion of inheritance with you. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer burnt offerings in every place that you see." That's the big verse. I'll read it again. "Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but in the place which the Lord chooses, in one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do as I commanded you." So actually what we're seeing is, this appears to be a direct violation of the law in Deuteronomy, them building this tribe. And so we see the western tribes confront the eastern tribes and demand a response, which the eastern tribes give in verse 25 through 28. And they'll even mention, did not Achan trespass the law? Achan trespassed the law of God, and it affected the whole nation. So that's why they're confronting the eastern tribes here. And they're saying, if you break the law, then we're all in trouble here because we're a nation and we're in this together. So they confront the nation, or they confront the eastern tribes, and this is the eastern tribes' response. They say, "For the Lord hath made Jordan a border between you and us, ye children of Reuben and children of Gad. Ye have no part in the Lord. So shall your children make our children cease from fearing the Lord. Therefore we said, let us now prepare us an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but that it may be a witness between us and you and our generations, that we might do of service to the Lord before him with our burnt offerings, with our sacrifices, with our peace offerings, that your children may not say in the Lord your time, ye have no part in the Lord." So what they're saying is, the place ordained to do sacrifices is in the western tribes. So we on the eastern tribes wanted to build a large monument that would just be a reminder to you to keep the law, to walk in God's commandments, that this was never intended to do burnt offerings. So it actually was not in violation of the Deuteronomic law. It was actually perfectly in step with it. Instead of writing these laws on their foreheads, which I'm sure they did too, they erected a giant monument that everyone could see that reminds them, keeping the law, keeping the law. So the altar was not an altar at all. Both tribes were actually in the right here as we kind of look at this story. If the eastern tribes were in violation of the law, the western tribes should come over, because throughout Israel, whenever the complaining or the sin starts, it starts on the outside and it comes in, and sometimes the Israelites don't squash that, and that's when they get into trouble. So the western tribe is actually in the right by going to confront them, but it ended up being a misunderstanding. The eastern tribe was actually right because it was not a place where they were doing burnt offerings, so it was not against the law. And then in the rest of the chapter, I believe I highlighted, says, God forbid that we should rebel against the Lord and turn this day from following our Lord to build an altar for burnt offerings, for meat offerings, for sacrifices, beside the altar that the Lord our God is before his tabernacle. So what looked like they were basically building a giant monument that said, hey, we're not reading Deuteronomy. It actually is a monument that they are. They're doing what they were supposed to do. And the priests come at the end and they bless the monument and the whole situation is diffused. So what does this mean for us? Remember, God has just shown us the receipts that he has rewarded the people's faithfulness with faithfulness by showing the division of the land. What we're seeing here is a story of Israel at a major high point. Think back on Genesis 12. They're a nation. They're in the promised land. That's 2 out of 3 promises. They're keeping in step with the commandments of the Lord, so they're in step with Deuteronomy, and Joshua is looking like the leader who was promised. So it's a good time to be an Israelite. Israel is keeping in step, beat for beat, with God's promises, and they're prospering. We have to keep in perspective that God wrote the Bible so that we can discover relationship with him. No book or story or verse or genealogy is separate from that. So this story is going to tie deeper into that as we get back into it. But we can see now that from this already that if we remain vigilant and steadfast in our pursuit of God, he will remain faithful to us. So that's all I have. And Monday, I believe, I'll be doing the next one. And it's going to tie back into this, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.